everyone's weighing in with their opinions on who should be the next head coach of the Cowboys, despite the fact that they actually do still have a head coach. We go to...
I wonder what he thinks about all this.
Boy, I'd love to know. I think about that a lot when I think about this in news about entertainment, politics, sports, where you have heavy hitters. My thought is, let's say they roll into the season with Mike McCarthy. Everything is status quo, but Sean Payton's looming in the background. Does McCarthy ever broach the topic with Jerry of, hey, so what's with this Sean Payton stuff? Or do they just go a full 10 months of Cold War and you never bring it up with your boss and everyone acts like it's normal?
Man, I don't know.
See, they say that's why...
I don't know how they waltz around that.
That's why Carlisle left. Because he knew this was the last year.
Yeah.
And it was looming over him. And he probably had a lot, easier path and knew some people in Indiana. He knew he'd get another gig right away. So if McCarthy had that feeling, he could just be like, I'm out. But that's not the way it works in the NFL. If he just resigned, there's no way he gets another gig.
But is somebody who's talking to Jerry, and I realize we're making this into a full-on soap opera, is somebody who's talking to Jerry who views McCarthy as a friend and a confidant going to him and saying, hey, this is a little more for real than you might think it is.
Well, what were you saying earlier in the pre-show meeting? Not the part where we were looking at people's daughters, but the part where we had quite a pre-show meeting.
Daily habit?
The daughters were very old, and it wasn't
right.
Yeah. What were you saying about there's like a rumor or that Jerry years ago had a little agreement with the owner of the Saints?
Yes.
To trade them Payton or that he would get Payton?
You can take this for what it's worth. It's from Mike Florio on Pro Football Talk. But I will tell you, based on what little bit of, I guess it would be secondhand knowledge of how the Saints and the Benson family operates, I absolutely believe this story. And it's in Florio's new book. So maybe he's also just trying to pimp a book. But the basic story is in January 2019, Jerry had worked out a deal with the Bensons in New Orleans that he could just pay out the rest of Payton's contract to the Saints.
Buy him out.
Right. But so that's my point. It's not really a trade as much as it is
So I'll give you $10 million or whatever it was.
And maybe then some.
Just let Payton go.
Yeah.
And she was going to do it.
And Garrett was still under contract, so they would have had to fire him at that point and then get Payton. That checks out, right?
They didn't fire him until after 2020, right?
It was in that around the 2020, because that's what was weird about it too. Is remember the very awkward time where Jason Garrett was just still at the facility for like a month after their season ended?
Yeah. So that was then?
No, this would have been the year before.
Okay.
This would have been the year before. So the Bensons are ready to do this. They know Payton wants to leave. They know he wants to work for Jerry. They know
Jerry's always wanted Payton.
Exactly.
Like
and
he's viewed that as a big regret. That guy got away. That's why we've talked about Kellen Moore. Like, would Kellen Moore be the next head coach because he doesn't want to see a guy he had here doing it for him go somewhere else and just be great for 15, 20 years.
I think one of the greatest things that Kellen Moore has going for him is Sean Payton.
Yeah.
And just can't make that mistake again. And by the same token, I think one of the greatest things Jason Garrett had going for him was Sean Payton.
So what fell through?
So what fell through was the Benson family owns both the Saints and the Pelicans in New Orleans, along with tons of car dealerships and I think real estate. They're not the Jones family, to be clear, but they have many business interests and they own both sports franchises. So in January, they're ready to do this. January 28, 2019. And if you remember, this takes us back to the Anthony Davis saga in New Orleans, where he wanted out and wanted out bad. And made it clear that he was not going to sign another deal. He stopped coming to games, even though he would say he was hurt, needed treatment on his back. If he did come to the game, he would sit on the bench. It was a messy, messy situation. They didn't want to get nothing for him, so they traded him. And that was such a huge blow to the public perception of the Pelicans at the time that the GM of the Saints, who was also the executive vice president of the Pelicans, Mickey Loomis, convinced Mr. Benson, you cannot lose Anthony Davis and Sean Payton in 1 month. Like, we can't recover from that, just as far as what people think of us as a sports family in this city. So tell Jerry the deal's off.
Because Peyton's a hero there, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's Breeze and Payton, for sure. And the Pelicans, it's not like Anthony Davis is a hero, but he was the only hope they've had in a long, long time.
Like ever.
Like ever, yeah. And then even Zion, you see how cursed that entire organization has been. And so, at least according to Florio, this was likely a done deal. And I believe it. I really do believe it.
So, what do you think about the fact that when you put their numbers side by side, they're incredibly similar? We were alluding to this yesterday, but then looking at it, they both had 15 years, Payton and McCarthy. So if we're just saying we got to get rid of McCarthy to get Payton in here. 631 winning percentage to 608. Both have 7 division titles. Both have 4 losing years in those 15. Payton 9 playoff teams, McCarthy 10. In the playoffs, Payton's 9-8, McCarthy is 10-9. Payton 3 NFC championships, McCarthy 4. Payton was 1-2 in those games. McCarthy was 1-3. They each have 1 Super Bowl title. Why is, and I had this thought too, that Payton's better.
I know David Moore's been hammering this point, but I do think it's just a matter of how you craft your public perception and persona. And I think a huge part of it is one of them worked with Drew Brees and one of them worked with Aaron Rodgers. And if I'm missing something, you guys will have to remind me, but I always felt like it was, very 1A, 1B with Payton and Breeze. I don't remember them getting crossways really ever. Whereas
Nor do I.
With Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy, it got nasty, and then dirty laundry gets aired, and Aaron Rodgers is, calling him the dumbest coach he ever worked for.
In my mind, I think of it as, whether this is true or not, I feel like Payton had a lot more influence on personnel and just everything with the Saints than McCarthy did with the Packers.
Certainly Ted Thompson loomed large over the Packers' operations as one of the greatest GMs of all time.
Yeah, as far as buying the groceries, putting everything together, it felt more like that was Payton, even though he wasn't the GM.
Another thing is with Rodgers and McCarthy, you got a guy there in Rodgers who is a lot more likely to stir up something than Drew Brees would be, I think.
Yeah. And I don't think that did McCarthy any favors as far as the way that they're thought of. I think there's something to what you're saying, Dan, that he was more involved in personnel, but the Saints also have a number of guys that have been hired by other teams from personnel, from personnel departments. So
yeah, you're pretty familiar with their behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I mean,
your brother worked there, right?
I'm not familiar with how it was in like the first half of Payton's career. He may have been more involved then, but I think in the back half, they got a bunch of guys down there that have been hired by other teams or are interviewing for other teams. The question I have about Sean Payton that I've never totally understood is, how many other NFL head coaches have been suspended for a year in the middle of their career?
That's a good one.
He went away for a year, and it's such an afterthought that it's now being made into a cutesy Kevin James Netflix movie.
Right.
Totally
That's
glossed over.
Not even thought of at all.
And I know that he wasn't...
As far as a demerit on why you should get Payton.
Yeah, and maybe it's unfair because he was kind of the trigger... He wasn't the trigger man. He was the guy overseeing it. But isn't that what we all say about Art Briles? Like,
so
of course, Art Briles was not
put on
going
Greg
to
Williams?
some woman's... Yeah. But for some reason with Sean Payton, it's just, it's just, it was on his watch. Well, then what about the time a year after that where the organization was sued for wrongful termination by a security operative that worked at the office in, not New Orleans, I think it's Metairie, claiming that he was having to cover up team officials stealing pain pills and writing fake prescriptions to themselves. Payton was one of the 2 people that he accused that. that charge to or of. Payton denied it, but there's nothing there when it comes to there's a little slime on
this guy
dude.
is Teflon.
But Mike McCarthy, people say he went and got a massage during a meeting, and people are like, what a slob. This guy's halfway on the job, halfway off. But with Payton, I don't know.
Nothing sticks, man.
I mean, it's impressive, but you factor that into comparing their records, which are so similar, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And I heard Junior say this morning, well, they lost a quarterback and another quarterback this year, and still were able to have a decent competitive season.
Right.
And the Cowboys couldn't do that last year with Andy Dalton, which is
that's
true.
a big thing in my head.
But they also went 7-9 3 years in a row with Drew Brees playing all but one of those games. So there's kind of pros and cons on both sides of the ledger that I think add up to a lot more equal than clear cut.
Don't you then also have to take a look at their schedules and their division at that point,
Oh, sure.
Winning.
I mean, it's impossible really to do an apples to apples, right? Because obviously there were good teams in both of those divisions. You'd probably make the case the NFC South was stronger than the North, but that much stronger?
Because you always hear McCarthy, a big demerit against him is he only won Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
Wonder if that'll quiet down now that Aaron Rodgers has had 3 great regular seasons without him and done nothing with that, Super Bowl-wise. Showing it's not just McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers.